Well, tonight we'll study a little further in Deuteronomy chapter 4. The text we're looking at is verse 9. We started on it last time, but we'll study some more about it. And just to remind us, because it's been a while since we started chapter 4, this is one of the chapters that God revealed to Ellen White that we especially needed to study. Now, we need to study all the Bible, but whenever another prophet stresses the importance of a particular chapter or section, to me that makes it doubly important. And so in verse 9, it says, "Only take heed to thyself, and keep thy soul diligently." You know, the devil is after us. And if he is allowed, he will rob us of our experience with God. So, one of the most important things that is brought out here in this chapter is that as they went forward from the time that Moses explained all this to them, they were to make sure to protect their soul. Keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thine eyes have seen. So they saw good things and they saw bad things, but every one of them was a special lesson that they were to remember. And lest they depart from thy heart all the days of thy life. Notice not the head, but the heart. Of course, you know, those two are kind of inseparably connected in these subjects. But it shows that the Old Testament was not looking for a legalistic religion. God wasn't calling for that. That's a mistaken understanding of the Old Testament. But he wanted the people's heart. But teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons. So one of our most important responsibilities is to pass on the knowledge that we have received in regard to what God wants us to do. Now, one of the problems that happens to an organization, and really I have seen that it has happened to this organization too, is that as we go down through the generations, some truth is lost. And so things get watered down. They're not like they used to be. This is telling us, don't let that happen. So what we have to do now is we have to make sure that we didn't lose anything that people knew before us. Not only that, they didn't get all the truth, so we need to dig out the rest of the truth without losing anything that people understood in the past. You know, there's a lot of issues, and we're not going to get into too many details tonight, but as I came to Wildwood, I learned about a lot of details of what God said to do, but I'd never heard that before. You know, it had been lost where I came from. People didn't know that. And so I know there's been a lot lost. And yet, God was trying to protect us against that. If you have the book, it's page 21, and the first column there toward the bottom. 2 Chronicles 33:9. Here's probably one of the times when Israel forgot the most what God had warned them about through Moses. It says, "Manasseh made Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to err and to do worse than the heathen." Can you imagine God's people forgetting so much that they actually did worse than the heathen? Now, of course, we have to understand what that really means. And the next quote in Desire of Ages, page 106, it says, in view of the light they had received from God, they were even worse than the heathen to whom they felt so much superior. So it doesn't mean they did more gross things than what the heathen did. For instance, when they caused their children to pass through the fire, they didn't sacrifice them as human sacrifices if they got burned. They didn't. But sometimes God allowed their children to be destroyed as they were going through the fire, as a rebuke to them that you should know better than this, than to let your children go through the fire. Now, of course, the first thing we would say today is, well, we don't make our children go through the fire. But, I read a quote in Ellen White where she said that parents that pass on a love of fashion to their children are causing their children to pass through the fire. So there are more subtle ways today that we do the same things they did. And it's a sin against greater light. We have more light now than any other generation. And so we are responsible for all of the light that we were given. So they were worse than the heathen because they rejected more light than the heathen did. Fifth Testimonies, page 340. As you mingle with worldlings, you drink in their spirit and are borne down by the worldly current, having no moral power to resist its influence. Now, many of us have to work with people that are worldlings, what would be called worldlings. But what is our influence? Do they drag us down? Or do we maintain a spiritual influence? That's very important, because it goes either way. Either they drag us down or we try to lift them up. Now, sometimes they don't want to be lifted up, but at least while you're trying, you're not being dragged down. But then many go to places where worldlings are. And they sit and they listen and they participate in the exact same activities that worldlings are doing. They don't have to be there, but they're choosing to be there. And so the influence that is surrounding them is dragging them down. And so this is something to watch for. This was writing to a particular person who was allowing that to happen. Then it says, you become one with the world loving, and your spirit is worse than theirs, for your choice is voluntary. Yes?
The word spirit used there, Pastor, is that character?
Attitude, yeah. In other words, they were mingling with people in the world, and the attitudes that the worldly people were expressing, they started expressing the same thing. And as a result, God says, notice what he says, your spirit is worse than theirs because they don't know any better, but you do. You're choosing voluntarily to go that path. Now, sad to say, it's gotten to where some Adventists are like worldlings in many ways, and they are unaware. I did things before learning some of these things, and I didn't do it because I wanted to be bad. I just didn't know any better. I hadn't read that part of the inspired writings. And so I think we have to make allowances for people and not condemn them. But on the other hand, we have to be careful not to be entering in to the spirit of the people of the world. In 1 Corinthians 5:1, we have a New Testament example of how God's people can get really bad. If we're not growing, if we're not maintaining the truth that God has given to us, and we're not, going upward and standing against the influences around us, we can get really bad. And this was a Christian person who had slipped very badly. And 1 Corinthians 5:1 says, "It is reportedly or reported commonly that there is fornication among you." Well, that, happens frequently in the Adventist church, sad to say. And it happens sometimes in the early Christian church. But this one was really bad. It says, "And such fornication as is not so much as named among the Gentiles, that one should have his father's wife." Can you imagine a person getting involved sexually with his father's wife? Now, I don't know whether it was his mother or whether, there was more than one mother in that family. It doesn't explain that. But here's a person that has professed to be a Christian, and he is acting like this. Well, obviously, he hasn't been protecting his relationship with God. He wouldn't be able to do that if he was protecting his relationship with God. And Acts of the Apostles explains it a little more. Page 303 and 4. It says, "One former convert had so far backslidden that his licentious course was a violation of even the low standard of morality held by the Gentile world." So here was a Christian who had been backsliding, which is what our text is telling us. Make sure you don't do that. Don't backslide. Keep what you have and keep gaining more. And he backslid to the place where he could do something that would shock even the Gentiles. And especially, someone that had been a Christian would shock the Gentiles. What does that do to our evangelistic, possibilities? It's really bad. So these things sometimes happen. And as Adventists, I think I've said this before, but we will either be the best or we will be the worst. Those are the only two options we have. And if we're following the light and we're growing in the light, we will be the best people on earth. And people will look at us and want, if they have any desire for right, they will want to become like us. But if we don't benefit from all the advantages we have, we will end up being the worst. I wonder how many Adventists are the worst drivers on the highway. They cut people off. They are determined to be first, and jump in front of people and all kinds of things. I know some have been pretty bad drivers. So our Christianity affects, everything that we do. And we should be a demonstration more and more of what a Christian should be like.
It's interesting that the next verse speaks of the administrative responsibility of the church.
Yes.
They should have put him out from among them.
That's right.
He didn't represent the church as a leader.
It's getting to where many churches don't want to disfellowship anybody, no matter what they do, but this is not right. We have to do that when people have backslidden to the point of doing serious sins. Lift him up, page 146 says it requires constant persevering effort to keep exalted the standard of righteousness. But none who are lax in principles are approved of God. It's like going upstream. It's not easy to go upstream. It's a constant battle, but we're in a world of sin. We're surrounded by people that like to sin, and our own danger of allowing our spiritual life to slip. And we get busy, or this happens or that happens, and we don't keep that fervency of relationship with Jesus, and we can start backsliding. And once you start backsliding, you don't know how far you'll slide. It can go a long ways for some people to where they might even shock themselves at what they would do because they have backslidden. So it requires constant, persevering effort. Our religious experience is spoiled by allowing our principles to become perverted. So if we used to practice something, we used to have a closer walk with Jesus, and we don't have as close now, or we start practicing things that we didn't used to do, that's a warning signal that we're slipping and we need to get back. You know, that first love is going away, and we can't afford to lose our first love. Now, and I believe that has more force than when it was written, now, more than in any other period of the world's history, should we heed the admonition, be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. Now, I believe in God's protection, but I know that He doesn't always protect His children from death. Doesn't always do that. And we can tell in the news that's taking place that there's more and more possibilities that people will get killed. And so we can't be looking in the future to get ready. We have to be ready every day. Be ready and stay ready. Once we're ready, to stay ready. Then in Matthew, we'll read Matthew first. Matthew 23:31, Jesus is talking to the people of God, and He points out one of their sins, which is a terrible sin. But they were not listening to Moses. They were not practicing what he said in verse 9. Matthew 23:31, it says, ye are the children of them which killed the prophets. Now, if you read about Ellen White, you'll find that Seventh-day Adventists persecuted Ellen White. They didn't kill her, but they did persecute her. And one of the things that hurts a prophet the most is when people don't listen and when they make fun of what the prophet says. And there was plenty of that against Ellen White. So it's not just the Jews that killed the prophets that God sent to them, but Seventh-day Adventists are guilty. Many Adventists are guilty. And even today, if people, of course, some people haven't really had a good class on why Ellen White's a prophet. So I'm gentle with most people, in regard to their attitude toward Ellen White. But there is plenty of evidence, and once a person has the evidence, if they don't listen, they are really persecuting the prophet. Because God has written it so that we would listen and practice what it said. Also, Stephen, in his sermon, he came to the same issue in Acts 7:52, and he said to them, which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted? He says, name me one. Tell me any prophet that your fathers didn't persecute. There wasn't any. Well, that shows backsliding, doesn't it? They wouldn't have done that. And of course, there's always a remnant. And the remnant cherished the prophets. They loved the prophets. They listened to the prophets. But the majority did not listen. And it was the majority that ended up killing the prophets. I just read in the Bible story to Joshua. We're going through the Bible stories with him. And we were reading about Jeremiah and all of what he went through. My, what a difficult experience. And it was like hardly anybody wanted to believe what he said. And they got mad. He finally thought, well, maybe if I write it down. But then they threw it in the fire and threw him in a pit because he had written down the message that God gave him. Then there's Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. I'm going to read it from the New King James Version. It's slightly different, but basic same idea. Romans 2, 14 and 15. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things contained in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts. So Paul is comparing here the Gentiles with the Jews. And he's saying some of the Gentiles obey the law even though they don't know about the law. They obey it through the ministry of the Holy Spirit. And here we have the Jew, and he knows about the law, but he's not obeying the law. Going on, it says, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men. So sometimes the conscience of the Gentile is better than the conscience of the Jew or the Adventist. This should not be, Our conscience should be the sharpest to warn us the moment we start deviating from the path that we're supposed to do. Now let's look a little bit more at the phrase where it says, teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons. In Lift Him Up, page 146, it says, all the instruction given to the Israelites of old in regard to teaching the commandments to their children is for us. So, now I know sometimes children don't want to listen too well to what God has said, so it's a battle. And we have other things that are more attractive, and it's a battle to actually do it, but we need to do our best to pass on the knowledge to our children. Not just in the home. That's you might say the most responsible people are the parents to train their children. But then the schools need to do the same. Because the most important responsibility of the older generation to the younger generation is to teach them what God wants and what He said. Today I was talking, we have a pastor who's in training at Southern University, and he's working with us there at Wildwood, and he's got a pretty conservative view, but there's a lot of things he doesn't know yet. And he hears a lot of things at the college, and so he wants to try them. And sometimes I have to say, well, no, we've gotten some counsel about not doing that. And we were talking about this today. The use of prizes and rewards to motivate young people to study or to accomplish something. And, he picked up on it pretty quick as I pointed that out to him. He must have read it at some time. But he wasn't thinking about it until I brought it up. So I'm teaching him, see? When he brings up ideas of what he wants to do in the church, I pass on to him what I've read and what I've studied. This is our job. Now, sometimes young people don't like it. They want to do what they feel like doing. But, that's our job. We can't abdicate that responsibility. We have to teach the younger people. Now, I don't make myself offensive if somebody, after a few tries, they don't want to listen and, they want to go their own way. I don't keep pressing it. But at least I've done my duty to try to pass on what I've learned. Going on, it says, if we become careless and neglect to urge the necessity of observing these commandments, as I know that many have done, let us all humble our hearts before God and make earnest, thorough work of repentance. So, of course, all of us here, our children are already grown. But if we realize, we have not been properly teaching them, we need to repent and we need to go back and do our best to try to correct it. I find I have to do that sometimes. Training grandchildren, you're not in the mood to have to really be as diligent as you were with your own children, because you're older, you feel, more tired, to really keep at it. And so I have allowed some laxity with Joshua, and I had to come back and I had to ask the Lord's forgiveness, and I had to have a talk with Joshua and explain to him why I was going to be tough on him in the future in regard to, especially his phone. That's the big battle with these real young ones today. And I said, you're only going to be able to have it for an hour a day. And, because when you have it a lot, then you start acting not so good. And he still has trouble seeing that. But every time that there's an opportunity, I'm still trying to help him understand that. And I'm being stricter now. It says, let us learn to deal mercifully with our children. So there is another ditch of being too harsh with them. In their tender years, they are to be kindly, patiently, intelligently, lovingly taught in all religious service, the parents making these lessons simple and attractive, in order that they may make known to their little ones the way of the Lord. In the past, the failure of parents to do this work has been felt in future generations. The sad thing is it keeps going on, If children are not trained right, then they don't train their children right, and they don't train theirs right, and it just keeps on going. So we have to do all we can, and if we have some children we made some mistakes with, we still have to pray and ask the Lord for opportunities, how we can try to make up for any of that we can, and I believe God will help us on that. Okay, now we'll go to verse 10, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 10. Maybe someone would like to read that for us.
I just wondered if you had a comment on the last phrase, we're teaching my son's sons, which are your grandchildren. Where's the balance between doing that and not interposing between the parent and his children? When the parents are Christians and he has a parent,
Yeah.
How do you balance that without taking a prerogative that really belongs with the parent?
Well, I know what it was back then, but to get back to that may not be possible. You see, they had a patriarchal system, and no matter how old a person got, they were respected even by their sons and daughters and by their grandchildren and by everyone that was born as long as they were alive. They were respected. And it was their responsibility to teach and make sure that the spiritual understanding was strong with everyone. But today, there's been so much freedom that we would be resented if we did that in every situation. So I guess the way we have to work at it is to do as much of it as we can without them casting us aside. Because if they won't let us do anymore, we can't do it. Yes.
And you get that in public school, then they wonder how their children marry outside the church.
Yeah, it's really dangerous to send children to public school. I believe that they should be in church school, even though it's pretty expensive, I know, and it's hard for people to, have the money to do it. Okay, someone read verse 10.
Especially concerning the day you stood us before the Lord thy God in Horeb, when the Lord said unto me, gather me the people together, and I will make them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they shall live upon the earth, and that they may teach their children.
Now this chapter is leading up to the Ten Commandments, which is in chapter 5. And so he's introducing here, he says, the number one thing I want you to pass on to your children is the experience that happened at Mount Sinai. And the Ten Commandments, which I gave you at that time, is very important that you make your children understand about the Ten Commandments. And when we get to that, which may take a little while, but when we get there, we're going to study each of those Ten Commandments. They are broader than what most people realize. They cover more territory. In fact, if we didn't have anything in the Bible except the Ten Commandments, we would have everything we need to make it to the kingdom of heaven. It's that concentrated truth in the way and the Ten Commandments that he gave. So it's extremely important to not only we teach them what they are, but we require them to live by the Ten Commandments. In Prophets and Kings, page 294, it says, the awe-inspiring scenes connected with the giving of the law at Sinai were never to be forgotten. And we'll go through those, but it was an earthquake. It was like a fire, a huge fire going up. There was lightning running all over the ground. People weren't sure that a bolt of lightning might come, where they were. It was a scary event. And God was trying to reveal his power. When he gave the commandments, he was saying, I can make you like this. I want to be able to make you like this. I want to come into your life in such a way that you always obey the Ten Commandments. That's what he was trying to tell them. And so he revealed his power in such an unusual way and so great that nobody that was there ever forgot. But he was worried that the next generation that did not go through that they would not be aware. And so they needed to pass on in as graphic a terms as they could and as clearly as they could what happened at Mount Sinai. Yes.
That must have been an experience, because I know the people they put their face to the ground.
Yes.
Moses, that they not hear it. But I was reading where Sister White says that the Father himself was there on Horeb with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Jesus in the Gospels refers to his Father's commandments, the Father's commandments. I know that he's included in the Holy Spirit, but that's how important God's law is to him,
Mm-hmm.
that he came here himself. That adds the magnitude of it to me. So.
That's right. That's right. Another one from 5th Testimonies 3:30. Those who have seen the truth and felt its importance. So, not everyone sees the truth, but to those of us that saw it, we understood the importance and have had an experience in the things of God, are to teach sound doctrine to their children. They should make them acquainted with the great pillars of our faith, the reasons why we are Seventh-day Adventists, why we are called, as were the children of Israel, to be a peculiar people, a holy nation, separate and distinct from all other people on the face of the earth. And we're not to cultivate their pride that we're better than other people, no. But we are to cultivate the specialness of being a Seventh-day Adventist. That God has called us to a very important role, and that is to reveal to the world the character of Jesus and the instructions that he gave us, and sound doctrine. You've probably noticed that the sanctuary doctrine has been disappearing out of the Adventist church. That wouldn't be if we were practicing what is said here. If those who understood the sanctuary doctrine made sure that their children understood that doctrine, and in the schools, if it was being made plain to all the students that go through schools, then, this problem wouldn't exist. Now, because the sanctuary is not understood well, we are having serious problems in understanding righteousness by faith. And people are falling for various false theories on that subject because they don't understand all the lessons that come from the sanctuary. And they're not, getting everything that God revealed through Ellen White. And so that's just one, but there's all of these pillars of our faith. We are to be very careful that that gets passed on to other people. Another one is the investigative judgment. That's, many people don't even really want to study that one because it scares them. They feel like, I might be lost. Surely God can't really see it that way. Yes.
I heard somebody say that we don't need Christ's robe of righteousness because the Father sees us.
Well.
What do you say about that?
Well,
The Father sees us, he knows us. I'm confused.
Well, my understanding is he will not see that we're righteous if we don't have it.
Pardon?
He will not see us as being righteous unless we have the robe.
True.
Yeah,
That's what I told him.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're standing like that parable, where that man came in and at the door everybody was offered a robe for this special wedding. But this one man said, I don't need that robe. And he came in his own garments. And so the end of the parable is he got thrown out. And that's exactly what the Father will do. Anyone that doesn't have the robe gets thrown out.
And we get that through faith in Jesus.
Exactly. Well, two ways.
Righteousness.
Yes. And there's two aspects of it. One is we trust Jesus to cover our messed up life, our sinful life. We trust him to do that.
Right.
But it can't stop there. That's the beginning. And of course it keeps on going. But the second thing is we have to let him change us by faith. Because if we don't let him change us by faith, eventually he takes the robe back. You see? That's why Revelation calls righteousness, it calls it the righteousness of saints. because it actually gets lived through us by Jesus. It's all by faith, but it gets lived through us because we're trusting in Him to change us. And so we become like Him because He's living His life through us. So, you know, a lot of people today think all they need is that first righteousness, that when I accept the fact I'm a sinner and I trust in Him, that I've got it and that's all I need to worry about. But that's only half of the story. The Protestants have that view. Adventists were to come along and say, yes, we understand that, and that's wonderful, but there's another thing that's also wonderful, and that is that Jesus can stop you from sinning, and you can gain the victory over sin. That's good news too, if we understand it right. Well, let's see, our time is about up. Yes.
Doug Batchelor tells the story of this woman who came forward during one of these meetings and decided to be baptized.
Mm-hmm.
But when the day came for baptism, she refused. She said, you know what, I thought about this, I can't do it. There's lots of requirements, I can't do it. And so Doug Batchelor said, that is when you need God, because you cannot do it.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't do it yourself. By faith in Jesus, He'll do it for you.
That's right. Yes.
Well, back to the sanctuary, I mean, we're in the Day of Atonement now. Now's the time that, just as the Jews did, they reviewed their life over and over to make sure they were right
Mm-hmm.
on the Day of Atonement. And I mean, there won't be any other opportunity, not another chance.
No, that's right. Well, we'll close with a very short one that you all know. Testimonies to Ministers, page 31. We have nothing to fear for the future except what? That's right. Except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us. So the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is very important history. Now we have a tendency to want to study only the successes, but we need to study the mistakes that we made as well. When I teach a history class on the Adventist Church, I teach the mistakes, not just the good things we did.
The Bible does.
Exactly. The Bible does that. And God revealed through Ellen White many mistakes that people made, not to condemn them, not to lose confidence in this movement, but if we don't know the mistakes that were made in the past, we will probably do it again. And so we must be careful to pass on a knowledge. Us older ones need to pass on a knowledge of the mistakes as well as the good things of the past so that those mistakes don't get made again. Yes.
I think we could profitably compare some Bible characters with some of the characters of some of our early Adventist leaders, some plus and some minus.
Mm-hmm.
There should be some comparisons that could be made there.
Yes. One that comes to mind is Uriah Smith. You know, Uriah Smith has been looked up to pretty highly, I believe, in the Adventist Church, but there was a period of 4 years at least in which he was completely rebelling against Ellen White and the message of Christ our righteousness. And he was even tarnishing Ellen White's name as he would talk to people and causing them to lose confidence in Ellen White. And she wrote him one time and she said, what you have said is going to cause trouble that may not be able to be reversed later on. That's the damage that he did. And so when he wrote on prophecy, he was one of our best. when he wrote on prophecy, but his attitude about Christ our righteousness, when it was given in 1888, was not worthy of, looking up to. And so there's a lot of things that took place, and they're all helpful for us. Plus, the Bible history of what happened to the Jews, we need to be aware of that. And sometimes I wonder, if we study these things in the Bible and we think, does this apply to the Adventist church? I think many people feel, no, it doesn't. It's not for us. It's just acquainting us with the past. But it does apply, because everything that's in the Bible was put there for the last generation. Yeah. So every story, every experience in the Bible has a lesson for Seventh-day Adventists.